Hi, everyone. This is your host, Raven Syed, and welcome back to Forgotten Echoes, a podcast where we dive into the mysterious and unsolved cases of Black women and girls that often get lost in time. That is exactly how I'm feeling right now. It's Friday, and I'm exhausted. I don't know if it's just me, but lately it's like no matter how much sleep I get, no matter how much I take it easy, I'm still exhausted. And I think it's just because it's summer, it's getting hot, and I'm in SoCal. And for a while, it was like at that 70, 75 degree weather, which is great weather for summer. And I thought, oh, we're going to have a pretty cool summer this year. And this past week shot up to like high 80s, low 90s, and I'm dying. So it's hot out here. It's just been a busy time. And this is the first episode since we've been on a bi-weekly schedule. So it feels even longer that I've gotten to speak to you guys. So hope you guys are hanging in there. There's a lot going on in the world. I hope you're staying positive, you're feeling good, and enjoying your summer. Now, as I always say, don't forget to subscribe to Forgotten Echoes. Download this episode. We're on YouTube, so subscribe to us there. And leave a comment so you can tune in anytime and anywhere. And as usual, thank you for just tuning in, whether it's consistently or every now and then, whether this is your first episode or you're up to date. I appreciate you so much, and I'm so incredibly grateful for each and every one of you. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's case. Today's episode is especially chilling. It's about a little girl who is bright and sweet and full of so many dreams, but she disappeared not from the shadows, but from a place you expect to be safe, a city shelter. Her name was Relisha Rudd, and in March of 2014, she vanished from Washington, D.C. under haunting circumstances. But what makes Relisha's case so difficult to digest is this. In 18 days, no one noticed she was missing. Not her school, not city officials, not even the shelter where she was living at. How does an 8-year-old go missing in the nation's capital without a trace? This is episode 19, The Disappearance of Relisha Rudd. Sources for today's episode include archives.fbi.gov, Crime Watch Daily, Crime Junkie Podcast, The Washington Post, and NBC Washington News. Now, let's get into the episode. Relisha Tano Rudd was born on October 29, 2005 in Washington, D.C. She was the oldest of 4 children born to Shamika Young, and she was the only girl, so she had 3 little brothers, which is crazy. If you know, you know. Those who knew Relisha described her as a gentle and soft-spoken little girl, but she had large, expressive eyes and a warm, radiant smile. And I'll post pictures of her on Instagram. She is an absolute cutie. Her favorite color was pink, and she had a nurturing side and often helped her mom take care of her 3 younger brothers. Her teacher said that she was polite and curious, just a little girl who loved art and enjoyed giving hugs. She was expressive and was growing up to be a well-rounded child, despite her family circumstances. You see, by the time she was 8, Relisha already experienced more instability than most people face in a lifetime. She already had spent majority of her life in homeless shelters throughout the D.C. area. She lived in poverty, in and out of shelters, bouncing between overcrowded apartments, foster care visits, and at times her family just simply was surviving. And I'm sure as a child that was super tough because you're at that age where you really crave routine and stability, and being so little, you really need that because you're in your formative years. And different reports say that she wasn't fond of her situation, like she understood what was going on. While she lived majority of her life on the go, she hated it and would often try and stay with different family members when she could, especially when she and her brothers were in shelters. So at this point, school kind of became a refuge for her because outside of that, it was so chaotic that when she was in school, there was structure, she had friends, she loved her teachers. So that kind of became a place of solace for her. And she was known for being a pretty good student. And reading different reports, it seems like the cycle kind of repeated itself because Relisha's mother, Shamika Young, had grown up in a similar environment. She entered the foster care system as a child and then aged out of the system without a support net. As a young mother, she struggled to care for all four of her children, and all of them were under the age of 9. And this led to Shamika not having a stable job or permanent housing. And it's hard to see this because it happens quite often, especially when it comes to lower-income families involving people of color. A lot of times, systems are set up to where it's really easy to continue the generational trauma if you're not careful. When I say systems, I really mean lack of. Because when the family moved into the DC General Homeless Shelter, a repurposed hospital that housed over 250 families, Relisha was just one of many vulnerable children in a system that was already stretched beyond its limits. A previous tenant of the shelter described that the environment had mice in the hallways and that you could hear people fighting at all hours of the night, and showers were often cold. It wasn't a place for healing or for children. So that tells you all you really need to know about the environment Relisha and her family were living in. And like many parents in crisis, Shamika and her family were just trying to survive from one day to the next, often leaning on whoever was willing to help. And one of those people was Khalil Tatum, who became unusually close to the family. So close, in fact, that Relisha called him Goddaddy. Tatum would bring the kids gifts, tablets, clothes, meals, you name it. And he was also a janitor at the shelter they were housed at. In hindsight, all of this raises countless red flags. But at the time, for a struggling mother trying to care for her 4 children, someone offering help might have not seemed too dangerous. So as the winter of 2014 faded into spring, staff at the Payne Elementary School began noticing something strange. Relisha was missing more and more school. Relisha had stopped showing up altogether in late February, and her teachers were concerned. She had been absent before, but this time it stretched longer, day after day. And as I explained earlier, Relisha was a good student. School was kind of a refuge for her, so she didn't miss school too often. But the school tried to be understanding. They knew her family situation, and absences can be common amongst children facing housing instability. But the absences didn't stop. They just kept piling up. So at this point, the school's like, hey, a day here or there we can excuse, but it started turning into several days in a row. And once it hit 8 days, the school's like, yeah, this is way too long. It's time to do something about this. And honestly, I'm a little confused because I just feel like 8 days in a row of missing school is just entirely too long, especially because they haven't done anything thus far. Like, I don't know, but I remember missing one day of school and my school would immediately call my parents or whoever was on my emergency card. And anything more than one day pretty much demanded some type of proof for my absence. Rather that be a doctor's note or confirmation from my parents that I was on vacation or whatever the case was. And I think in this situation, that was probably one of the biggest misses because there was so much time between anyone actually laying eyes on Relisha. So yeah, the school called Shamika and they're like, hey, where's your daughter? We haven't seen her in school now, and it's going on a couple of weeks. And then came the excuse that made everyone really uneasy. Now, Shamika tells the school that Relisha was under medical care and that she was being treated by a doctor named Dr. Tatum for a neurological disorder. So the school reaches out to social workers who immediately ask for proof. Like, we can't just take your word for that, and even if we did, we're concerned about her disorder, which was never specified. Who is the doctor that she's being treated by? What kind of treatment is she receiving? Where were her medical records? And so forth. So social workers do actually get in contact with this Dr. Tatum, who does essentially confirm Shamika's story. He tells the social workers that Relisha is indeed sick and under his care, and that was the reason she'd been out of school for so long. And at this point, the social workers and the school are like, great, thanks so much for that explanation, but once again, we still need proof, and we're going to need that as soon as possible. Now, this is where reporting gets a little fuzzy because I saw reports that say they plan to meet in person with Dr. Tatum, but then I also saw reports that he planned to put together her medical file and leave it at the shelter that the family was being housed at so social workers can come collect it that way. But nonetheless, they don't go to the shelter to collect those medical records until 9 days after the conversation with this Dr. Tatum. And at this point, it's March 18th or 19th. So if you're keeping track at this point, it's been about 18 days of no one officially being able to say they've seen Relisha, which is crazy because my mind immediately asks one question. Why the F did it take 9 days for social workers to get down to that shelter to collect the files or to meet this Dr. Tatum? Where is the sense of urgency? We're talking about a young 8-year-old child who loves school, who all of a sudden is not in school for almost 2 weeks, and there's a random doctor on the phone saying that she has this neurological disorder that they've never heard about, hence why they're asking for medical records, and then you wait over a week to go follow up with this so-called doctor. I just feel like this little girl was failed at so many steps in this story. And sure, to play devil's advocate, maybe it was the overload of cases social workers were handling. Maybe it was some form of miscommunication between the school, shelter staff, and the child welfare services. Maybe tragically, it was just a belief that someone else would take care of it. Regardless, it's so alarming and truly disheartening, but not uncommon, especially when you're talking about Black girls going missing. And then you add in the fact that her family was low income. It just seems like there wasn't any sense of urgency to lay eyes on this little girl. So 9 days later, when social workers finally visit the shelter to collect the medical records, they were hit with news that made their stomachs drop. The file wasn't there, but more alarmingly, neither was Relisha. Shelter staff tell social workers they hadn't seen her in days, maybe even weeks at this point. And panic immediately sets in. From here, the pieces start falling into place, and the picture was horrifying. The shelter tells social workers that they haven't heard of a Dr. Tatum and haven't seen a doctor coming around in general, so they're unsure of who this person is. But they do know of a Khalil Tatum, who is a janitor for the shelter. Khalil is a 51-year-old man who's pretty close with Shamika and her kids, but he has an especially close relationship with Relisha. He wasn't a medical professional whatsoever, and come to think of it, they hadn't seen him in work for the past few days. So at this point, they're both missing. Social workers are dumbfounded by the information and immediately call the DC Metro Police Department, and Relisha is officially declared missing. When police question Shamika, she admits she hasn't seen her daughter in weeks. She hadn't been the one calling her in sick to school either. Instead, she told police that Relisha had been staying with her grandmother, Melissa. But when investigators spoke to the grandmother, she denied it and placed the blame back on her daughter, Shamika. She hadn't been with Relisha either. But I do want to make the note that I saw different reports when it comes to this claim. So yeah, Shamika said she hadn't seen her daughter and that she thought she was with her grandmother the entire time. And the grandmother's like, no, that's not true. She was with her mother. But in some reports, it says that maybe she was with her grandmother for a period of that time. And this Tatum comes by to her grandmother's home to pick up Relisha. Because in other sources, it does say that Melissa was okay with Tatum picking her up because Shamika was okay with it and he had formed a relationship with the family. And it seemed like everyone trusted him. So not sure if she was saying that during the time she was missing, she let him pick her up, or she let him pick her up from her house at different periods of time. I'm unsure. But what we do know is that no one has seen Relisha in 18 days. Not her family, not the shelter staff, and not school officials. So immediately, DC police is like, where is Khalil Tatum? They're trying to go through footage, track his phone, ask people for his last whereabouts, and eventually they track him to a hotel in PG County, Maryland, which is around 30 minutes or so from the shelter. But what they find sends chills down the officers' spines. Instead of finding Tatum or Relisha, they find Tatum's wife, Andrea Tatum, shot in the head, laying face down in the hotel bed. Police are mortified and do believe she was murdered by her husband. An arrest warrant is issued for Khalil Tatum, and the hunt continues. Investigators turn to the hotel for surveillance footage, which surprisingly was working, and they do get a chance to view it. The footage showed Khalil and Andrea checking into the hotel, but Relisha was nowhere in sight. What was once panic has now turned to dread. So besides a few local statements from Metro DC Police Department, it took time for the media to pick up this story. And it really never blew up on a national level either, which is so sad, but once again not uncommon when it comes to people of color, especially Black women and girls. But the fact that she was only 8 years old infuriates me. I immediately thought of the disappearance of Shaikimia Pate that I covered a few months ago. So at first the story didn't even receive much local coverage, but then the FBI got involved and released chilling footage as an effort to locate Tatum. Security cameras capture Relisha walking alongside Tatum just days earlier at a Holiday Inn Express in Northeast DC, carrying a small plastic bag. She was wearing jeans and a black jacket, and I'll add the footage on Instagram. And she doesn't seem scared or anything, she's just walking behind Tatum. But what was weird was there was no footage of her leaving. So my first question was, where's the footage of her leaving? And it's odd because they do see Tatum leave by himself. So then I thought maybe she went out a back door or out of camera view, or maybe she was transported out in another way, like in a bag or something, which is so scary to think about. Now, on another camera, investigators get a hold of more surveillance footage, and what they find darkens the story even further. On March 2nd, a camera catches Khalil Tatum at a Home Depot buying a few pretty suspicious items: a shovel, trash bags, and lye. So without saying it, investigators are now not just thinking about finding a missing girl, but they're preparing for the possibility of finding a body. And this leads the DC Police Department and the FBI to launch a pretty extensive search of the Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens in Northwest DC, hoping for answers. And I don't know what brought them to that specific park. Maybe it was a tip or other information that the public just isn't aware of, but that's where they search. So days go by with no luck, but on April 1st, they do find something, but not at all what anybody could have ever imagined. Searching the park, they find Khalil Tatum in his shed, dead by a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. But still, no Relisha. Police are mortified. Their last hope for finding Relisha, gone. And that's where things come to a heart-wrenching halt. After weeks of missteps, red flags, and missed opportunities, the man who likely knew what happened to her was gone. And the little girl who had quietly vanished, whose story took nearly 3 weeks to even be recognized, was still missing. Police believe that someone knows what happened out there. Maybe someone saw them together. Maybe someone in the family. Maybe someone who thought something seemed wrong but didn't say anything at the time. So how did this happen? How did a city lose a child in its care? Relisha's disappearance exposed deep cracks in the systems designed to protect vulnerable children. The shelter had no safeguards to limit Tatum's access to families. The school failed to escalate her prolonged absence immediately. And the child welfare system, though already involved with the family, didn't act quickly enough to intervene. And obviously, no single person bears all the blame, but too many people saw signs and looked the other way or didn't act quick enough. And in result, an innocent, sweet, smart little girl disappeared. In the years that followed, Shamika Young lost custody of all her remaining children. She was vilified by the media and by the public. And quite frankly, most people questioned her choices. And I'm not judging here because I don't understand what she was going through, and I myself am not a mom. I cannot get over the fact that she didn't know where her baby was for weeks. I just can't wrap my head around it. I also don't understand how a young girl was allowed to spend so much solo time with a 51-year-old man on several occasions. I just will never understand it. But on the other hand, others saw her as another victim of a vicious generational cycle of trauma. Now, the city promised reform, and with that, the DC General Shelter was eventually closed in 2018. But for many, that was too little, too late. Relisha's brothers grew up without their sister, and her family without answers. And as of this recording, July of 2025, Relisha Rudd has been missing for over 11 years. The FBI and DC police say that the case remains open, but no new leads have surfaced. No sightings, no remains, and no clues. There is only silence and the echo of a young girl's absence. If Relisha Rudd was still alive today, she would be 19 years old. There's still hope, but hope needs help. Now here's the call to action. If you know anything about the disappearance of Relisha Rudd, please contact the DC Metropolitan Police Department at area code 202-727-9099 or submit a tip anonymously to the text tip line at 50411. You can also call the FBI at area code 1-800-CALL-FBI. Even the smallest piece of information could make all the difference. To anyone listening, if you know something, say something. Share this story. Tell a friend, a family member, spread the word, spread her pictures. Whatever you have to do, let's get this story out there. A family has waited over a decade for answers, and a little girl deserves justice. This is not just a story, it's a call to remember the forgotten and to speak up for those who no longer have a voice. I'm sending so much love to the Rudd family. Thank you for tuning in to episode 19 of Forgotten Echoes. If you appreciate the cases I cover, download this episode and leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Also, don't forget to follow us on TikTok and Instagram for visuals of the cases covered. I'm Raven Syed, and I'll see you next week with another case that needs to be remembered. Stay vigilant, stay aware, and keep the echoes of the forgotten alive. I'll see you soon.